Hello and welcome to another Quaranstream. I am your host, JoeMagician, and today we'll be delving into the backstory of the house that most people kind of don't really think of as a house in universe or outside with the readers, and that is House Baelish of the Fingers. Peter Littlefinger Baelish is a character that absolutely needs to get a job, a villainous figure, known for his total lack of caring for others, maybe sociopathy, a love of climbing chaos ladders, I can't say it the same way Aidan Gillian does, and his lifelong obsession of Catelyn Tully. Today we'll be digging a little deeper into the history of House Baelish, how Littlefinger compares and contrasts with his ancestors, some tinfoil about that, and what the future holds for the House of the Titan's Head and the Mockingbird. Just so you guys know, this is a topic suggested by my newest Seneschal level patron, Ramona Z, who was in the chat earlier. Thank you again very much for your support, Ramona, and I hope you enjoy your chosen topic. There are patron levels where you can do this kind of thing, where you suggest a topic or like a bad theory for me to break down or something like that, and you know, we can figure something out. I can do a stream or a video on it. Yeah. So this is for you, Ramona. This is yours. And as usual, like, subscribe, do all the YouTube things. They really do help with the mysterious YouTube algorithms that govern all of YouTube and determine whether or not anybody sees anything. If you want to support me on my channel, obviously you can go to patreon.com/JoeMagician, super chats. I don't think I have any PayPal links handy, but yes, those are available. Actually, let me make sure I have it open this time, because last time I missed one from Danny McKay, who I saw earlier in the chat. Thank you very much, Danny. I missed it during the stream, apparently. Okay, there we go. Got it open. We did it. Is there going to be a Nauticast reread? I don't have any plans of doing a reread on The Song of Ice and Fire. I've been on other reread podcasts. So I've been on Obsidian Knights, Nauticast, Girls Gone Canon. So if you're looking for me doing rereads, it'll probably be that stuff. Although I am working on sort of doing rereads on George's other works for patron-only episodes. The upcoming one's Meat House Man. That one's about 7 pages long at this point. I'm dangerously approaching the point where the length of the analysis is equal to the length of the story. Yeah. That's how that goes. So I wasn't really going to talk about this because I was not. Oh, am I going to be on Nauticast again? Probably at some point. Jeff and Emmett are lovely guys, and they enjoy having me on, and I enjoy ripping Stannis a new one for their audience. But yeah, today we're going to talk about House Baelish. But I don't know if you guys noticed it, but just a quick detour. George released a new Nautablog today. Most of the time, his Nautablogs are not worth talking about in terms of like the larger fandom, Song of Ice and Fire, that kind of stuff. Most of the time, they're talking about like wild cards or the train he's buying or all these other kind of weird things. But today, he released a Winds of Winter update one, kind of like the one I talked about in my last video. What was I talking about? Dance of the Dragons and also Engurm's update. So it looks like he has been working on particular chapters. He's been writing about Tyrion, Samwell Tarly, Melisandre, Victarion Greyjoy, and Arya again. And also talking about his self-imposed isolation up on his mountain cabin. In case you don't know, Martin has essentially isolated himself up on a cabin to try and just burn through Winds of Winter and also stay safe from COVID. Weird detail that apparently he lives with his assistants like 2 weeks at a time. They come up to the cabin and stay with him. That's all he hangs out with. And then they leave and another one comes in. He calls it his writer's retreat. I do love the detail, too, that he bought the house across the street from his in order to be his writing retreat, and then that wasn't working, so he then bought another writing retreat. So he's got 2 mountain retreats yet. Yeah, it did not describe his breakfast, sadly. A lot of interesting stuff in these chapters. Samwell Tarly is in Old Town at this point, I believe, so that could tie in with Euron stuff. Emmett's wet dreams about the Krakens coming to destroy the city, the squishers rising from the depths. Let's see here. Tyrion will obviously have a really cool POV on the Battle of Fire. Also, interactions with Dany. He seems almost certain to interact with her at some point, and he's already put one Targaryen, if you consider him that, on a suicidal pact. So that he's visiting Tyrion is interesting in that sense. If you think about the larger plot. Let's see here. Victorian, again, Battle of Fire stuff. I guess we're going to see maybe 3 POVs on that whole Battle of Fire, and maybe a 4th with Dany returning. That would be super interesting. I would like Tyrion to get out of his super depressive phase at some point. So I'm excited for that one. But the one I'm most excited about, I was talking about on Twitter, is the Melisandre chapter. Or whatever chapters he's working on for. I was on Radio Westeros like a month or 2 ago. I think like 2 months at this point. And we were talking about like how many chapters Melisandre's going to have. And I said like 2 or 3. But the most interesting part of those chapters is going to be that she's the only one left at the wall. Jon is next level dead. Samwell is in Old Town. So any action that's going to be happening in the Winds of Winter around Castle Black will be through Melisandre's POV. And it's I'm excited to see that he's working on that part of the story, because when you think about it conceptually, it's got to be like one of the hardest parts that he's going to write. It's going to be Melisandre in the middle of chaos. That's presumably the only POV he's got, unless we're talking about a Jon in Ghost POV, which seems definitely on the table with his wolf writing before. I guess if you can call it that, wolf writing. Maybe Bran will see through Mormont's Raven or something like that. That would be pretty cool. But presumably Melisandre will be the only human eyes seeing what's happening after Jon's death. And the show example tells us that she'll be the one to bring him back from the dead. I don't know if that's going to be necessarily true in the books, but definitely the way she's being used for high magic, the way she kind of sees Jon as her patron at this point with Stannis gone, invites the idea that Melisandre will be very motivated to bring the Lord Commander back from the dead if she can. Speaking of, there is Ramona in the chat. She says, "I'm very grateful for the high quality of your streams. George should also be grateful you keep us busy while he was hanging with Vic and Ty." Yeah. Again, thanks so much for signing up for Patreon, Ramona. This one's yours. Yeah, I also just think like you should go check out that the Not a Blog post, just not for like Winds of Winter update, which is super interesting as a Song of Ice and Fire fans, but also like his state of mind, what his life is like at this point. It kind of makes sense to me that he's been writing Samwell and Tyrion, because he sounds pretty isolated, sounds pretty lonely, sounds kind of down in the dumps, which is sort of where Sam and Tyrion came from in his brain. Those are like those are the kind of characters he pours his worst feelings into. Feelings of inadequacy, feelings of isolation, feelings of being an outsider. So if he's writing those chapters, it's probably coming from this sort of place, which I find interesting. Oh yeah, good call, Chrissy of Old Stones. Slam that like button. We got 118 here, 50 likes. Remember, we get to 150 likes. That hat's going on. 175, that one's going on. And that one's got the cool turtle thing on it. Yeah, Gurm hat today, folks. Yeah, he released a blog post. If I had known this was coming, I might have just done an entire stream about that. But that's what I prepared for. That's not what we're here to talk about. We're here today to talk about House Baelish. So with all of that out of the way, let's talk about Petyr Baelish and how this knightly house from the Vale went from basically peasantry in Westeros to controlling an entire kingdom and owning the largest castle in the known world in Harrenhal, although it's, next level destroyed and all that other fun stuff. Thanks so much, Aegon the Conqueror. Good job on that one. They've really come far from humble origins. And this is something I actually enjoyed about researching this, is I learned a lot more about where the Baelishes came from, how Petyr got his start, how we even get to the point where he's in the position he is. And that goes back to, of course, Braavos. This is not something that they touched on super amount in the show, and I'm sure whatever Maester Mary is, she's excitedly jumping up and down because we're going to talk about Braavos. Oh, people pronounce it Peter? Petar? I don't know. Who knows how they are going to do that. So, House Baelish originates with Petyr's great-grandfather, who was a sellsword in Braavos, fighting for House Corbray in the Vale. The timeline of this is kind of fun to think about where George placed them. So there's 4 generations, great-grandfather, grandfather, father, Petyr. So 4 generations of Baelishes in Westeros. If you assume like 20, 25 years in between each generation, which is pretty normal, then with Petyr being born in 268, you end up with his grandfather likely coming to Westeros during the Blackfire Rebellions. I would actually go as far to say probably the first Blackfire Rebellion. And the reason for this is that during the Blackfire Rebellions, the Corbrays fought on the side of the Targaryens. They were a loyalist faction, and in particular, Sir Gawain Corbray of the Kingsguard had his famous duel on Redgrass Field with Daemon Blackfire with his Lady Forlorn Valyrian Steel Sword. The two of them went back and forth for an hour. Like, most duels are over in minutes. It is kind of insane to think about what that duel must have been like among all this chaos. Daemon does win, and in an act of mercy, he asks for Sir Gawain, who's also of the Kingsguard, to be taken from the battlefield and spared for noble reasons, I guess. And I'm wondering if this is maybe where this Braavosi sellsword of the Baelishes proved his worth to the Corbrays and the Vale Lords. Mostly because this is really the only time throughout any of the Blackfire Rebellions we really hear about the deeds of House Corbray. They kind of disappear from the narrative afterwards. It's around Gawain that this happens, and given the timing, it would make a lot of sense. When you're talking about a massive civil war in Westeros, the Blackfires versus the Targaryens, you would need a lot of soldiers, and you'd be hiring sellswords left and right. It would totally make sense that the Corbrays would reach out across the narrow sea to Braavos to get some sellswords. If you look at the map, they're actually... Braavos and the Fingers are the closest parts to each other, and the Corbrays are the Lord of the Fingers. More or less part of it. Yeah, and we don't really hear much else about House Corbray, so if this Baelish, the sellsword, had something to do with Redgrass Field, if he was one of those that saved Gawain Corbray, if he made a good impression of himself on Redgrass Field, you can imagine why this random sellsword went from just being a hired arm to being a part of the Corbray family. Well, not their family, but their household anyway. That's what ends up happening. From what we understand, the sellsword basically joins the house of the Corbrays. Somehow he proved his worth and loyalty. The easiest connection is probably maybe Bronn. That's probably the what we should be thinking about here. Nobody sellswords that found their way into a noble house seemingly permanently. That sort of thing happens all the time throughout history, relatively... throughout history, but it's relatively rare, especially for what we're talking about with the Baelishes, where they were immigrants from Braavos. That kind of thing is much more uncommon. So this particular sellsword must have been exceptional in some way to make the Corbrays keep them around. Oh, Sophie B in the chat. I wonder if the Baelish, the sellsword, had been a water dancer considering Peter's own physical stature. Absolutely. It could very well be like a Cyril Farrell kind of figure. Somebody that absolutely proved their worth within the Vale and decided to stay. That's one of the things that this shows that it was more of a two-sided relationship. That, I mean, they were hired to come to Westeros. They were hired to come to fight for presumably the Targaryens and the Corbrays. But when the war was over, they didn't just take their money and go home to Braavos. This Baelish decided, I'm going to stay here in the Vale, which is quite a choice. I mean, when you consider the cultures of Braavos and you consider the culture of the Vale, I mean, they are radically different. The only thing they really have in common is that that they have kind of a similar sort of coldish climate most of the time. That's about it. The Vale of Arryn is almost like an elven kingdom in Westeros, and Braavos is more like a like a sort of like a trade city or something like that. It's lots of people coming and going, a lot of fun, a focus on, focus on the water and trade. We get the stories of the water dancers fighting each other in the streets. That's nothing like the Vale, which is super proper and very, very fantasy medievalish, I would say. So there must have been some kind of connection that that happened between this great grandfather and as well Lord Corbray. Just a little side note about this. It kind of makes you wonder what this guy was like, because we know that Peter Baelish and also Peter Baelish's father perform much the same thing on lords in Westeros. Peter's father made a big impression on Lord Hoster and used that to advance himself. Peter Baelish does that with the Aarons and the Lannisters, where they're able to charm their way outside of their social strata. They're able to essentially make friends of higher lords and use that to their advantage. So perhaps there's some sort of that in this figure. Not only may he have been a great sellsword, but also somebody that made fast friends with the Corbrays in some way. Yeah, it seems very much like Venice. Good call. And like I said, we don't. What was I saying? I was reading the chat for a second. Oh yeah, it must have also been a very generous offer to make this Braavosi stay in the Vale and giving up Braavos, giving up his home. Or maybe the guy had nothing to go back to in Braavos, which could very well be the case. We don't hear anything about them. There's no tales of House Baelish back in Braavos from the POVs we see there, so it may be that this was this guy's only chance to make it in the world and to seize the opportunity, taking advantage of Lord Corbray's like for this guy. Again, very much like Littlefinger, when the opportunity is presented, his great-grandfather jumped for it. And then we get to his grandfather. Now, we don't really know exactly the timeline for this, but somewhere in here, the Baelishes were granted the lands on the Fingers, but also we learned that Littlefinger's grandfather was knighted in the Faith of the Seven, which tells you quite a bit that this Braavosi family was willing to, or this particular person was willing to convert basically to the Faith of the Seven to become a knight. You have to be anointed with the holy oils. It's being a knight is being. Not everybody takes the religious part very seriously, but they don't typically knight people outside their own religion. So whatever the Baelish's religion was, this grandfather was willing to give it up to become a knight in Westeros. And that's a very, very fast transition from being a Braavosi into trying to be a Vale man. This may indicate that this child was born and raised in the Vale, and that to the culture he was raised in, unlike his father. And it's at this point he also took. This is kind of an odd thing about learning about House Baelish as they try to integrate as immigrants into the Vale. He takes the head of the Titan of Braavos with its flaming eyes on a light green field as his sigil, and that's such an unusual choice. But it also indicates, obviously, that he did some exceptional service for Lord Corbray. Maybe this was a favor being paid off for to his father for whatever he did during the Blackfire Rebellions. This could have been during another Blackfire Rebellion. There were other battles, other wars, maybe the Third Blackfire Rebellion, or something like that. I was thinking about this while I was reading. Somewhere in the world, while Duncan Egg is happening, there are the members of House Baelish running around, which is kind of fun. I wonder if, like, George toyed with the idea of having a Baelish show up in one of the jousts, like the Mystery Knight. This would have been probably around the time frame when that young man was knighted, or at least when he was growing up. Super chat here from I'm going to pronounce that Vladimir Raskin. I think that's Russian somethings. What would be the origin of Littlefinger's intelligence, political wisdom? Could it be he acquired it from someone or something? It does seem likely, with just how quickly this family rose from being sellswords to where Littlefinger is, that intelligence was a trait of, or an important part of House Baelish. It is extraordinarily hard to go from sellsword to knight. It's extremely hard to go from knight to landed knight. There's all sorts of hedge knights out there. And then to go from even a landed knight to a lordly person like Littlefinger is not something that is done easily. It shows massive amounts of intelligence, ambition, and political maneuvering to be able to do that, because you don't just have to be a good knight. You don't have to just be a good fighter. You have to do it in such a way that your lord finds out about it and is willing to reward you for it. So, yeah, I think there is definitely an idea that this family from Braavos is one that is very intelligent and also very good at marketing themselves and making sure that their services are not unrewarded. Thanks so much for the super chat, though. Okay, where was I talking about? Yeah, I agree, Sophie B. It is kind of unusual that the Baelishes were so willing, just one generation away, to completely give up their religion. It would be very hard for, like, if you asked a Northerner to give up their religion for the Faith of Seven, or likewise, something from the Faith to convert to the Old Gods. Either the Faith of the Seven had a very big impact on this grandfather, or it shows, again, his ambition, that he was willing to give up at least part of his Braavosi identity in order to advance himself. Yeah, Isabel Lamego, you have to imagine Bronn, really Bronn. Yeah, we're talking, basically, Littlefinger is like the great-grandson of Bronn, basically. I think that's kind of what we're talking about. Although you didn't have to be a strict adherent, but you would have to probably convert to become a knight. But you can tell that there's some sort of dissonance within this character, because when you look at his sigil, the Titan of Braavos, this character is becoming a knight. He's integrating himself into Vale culture. He's very much trying to make his way in this new place to his family, but also he's trying not to let go of his past. And in that we see the sigil of the Titan of Braavos, so that everyone knows when they ride against him in the lists, when this guy fights against you, they are looking at, the Titan of Braavos itself. He doesn't really want to let go of that aspect of himself, or at least an homage to his father. Yeah, it's a very fierce sigil. It's one that's supposed to probably inspire dread. It's angry. It's got fiery eyes. It would be intimidating. So I think this tells you that although the Baelishes seem to be very intelligent, they were very much in these two generations trying to trade on their fierceness in battle and trying to play up the idea that they are these like Braavosi, water dancer, fierce warrior types. That's the message this wants to put across. But it's also something important for the founding of the family, because wherever House Baelish goes from here, from after being knighted, clearly Littlefinger's grandfather wanted everyone, for however long they lasted, to remember that they are Braavosi, the Titan of Braavos, that this is their origins, to never let that go. It will be with them as long as for as long as they go. Well, in theory. Thanks, Peter. Thanks about that one. But this also kind of maybe tells you about the backstory of the Baelishes and Braavos, because the Titan of Braavos is pretty generic. That's not like a thing particular to any one person. That's something that the whole of Braavos has. It would. I was trying to think of a comparison. I think it would be kind of like if you took like the Statue of Liberty as your sigil. It's a symbol of a culture. It's a symbol of a city. It's not really one person's thing. So this may tell you that they didn't have much from where they came from Braavos, and may inform why this family made the decision to stay in the Vale, to join the Faith of the Seven, apparently, to become knights instead of water dancers, I guess. It's there is a history, obviously, with them in Braavos, but not like an important one. Like these were probably not people that had a lot of means where they came from. Otherwise, they would have taken the money and go home. The Vale isn't exactly awesome. It also speaks to kind of like the idea of them being fierce in battle, being a fierce guardian, someone to be feared, inspire dread, which is kind of funny when you think about Peter Baelish as a character, but this is what his grandfather and his great-grandfather were going for. They wanted to be known as the great fighters they clearly were. Kind of left turn on that one. That one did not continue. Let's see here. Oh, good point from the chat. Nile 001. Only when a relatively large group moves to a new society do they keep their religion across generations. That's true. This would be a father and son that were very isolated within the Vale. So you can see how you might want to convert to the local culture and religion just to try and fit in a little bit more. Their sigil also doesn't feature the fingers or where their castle is eventually, or their castle, their keep eventually is. So I would guess the sigil came before the land. A lot of people tend, like, you could think like maybe like a hand or like I don't know, something to do with the veil and the fingers. Rather, they chose to instead celebrate their Braavosi heritage. And again, I just wanted to point out, this is astoundingly quick upward mobility for, in particular, foreign sellsword in Westeros, where they tend to be pretty xenophobic, and they don't like foreigners at all. To go from sellsword to knight to landholder in 2 generations is almost unheard of. That the only character we see kind of like that happening is sort of Bronn, and Bronn is at least a native Westerosi who's like experienced in this culture, who grew up in it. This is quite something for the Baelishes to be rising so high so fast. Usually, especially when it seems like they came from maybe a poor background or one without means, that they couldn't buy their way into land, they couldn't buy their way into nobility, they had to earn it through the existing lords. And again, when you look at the Blackfire rebellions, that kind of makes sense. It's really interesting thinking about the fact that the Baelishes owe everything to Daemon Blackfire rebellion. That one way or another, both these 2 generations seem to have been embroiled in the Blackfire conflicts. Especially because it created a need. It meant that they had to hire out, they had to find help, but it also means, in particular, that a lot of people died throughout these rebellions. A lot of soldiers would have died, a lot of knights. Probably many smaller families and knightly houses may have been wiped out during these, or exiled. The other part is exile. And if you're a lord after you win the Blackfire Rebellions, well, the Targaryens and the Loyalists were not stingy about rewarding those who stayed on their side, and, you know, getting rid of those who sided with Daemon. And that creates this this power vacuum where a lot of people like the Baelishes could also step into it. And that's where we get to sort of the the Dreer Fort, as Littlefinger talks about it. So I'm guessing it's around this time, maybe through his grandfather, that the Baelishes are rewarded with a tiny, tiny tower on the smallest of the fingers in the Vale, which belong mostly to House Corbray. Littlefinger describes it to show you exactly what he thinks of his heritage. He says, "And there it stands, miserable as it is, my ancestral home. It has no name, I fear. A great lord's seat ought to have a name, wouldn't you agree? Winterfell, the Eyrie, Riverrun, those are castles. Lord of Harrenhal now, that is a sweet ring to it. But what was I before? Lord of Sheepshit and master of the Dreer Fort? It lacks a certain something." And that's kind of what we're talking about here. The Dreer Fort, as it's known, is barely exists. It hosts a small village of just like a dozen families. Let's say a lot of sheep, a peat bog, a hermit's cave. There's no harbor, even though it's on the fingers, so you can't really even develop it from trade. It's very small also. From the POV, apparently you only need half a day to ride from one end to the other. So even though there were a lot of opportunities opened up and the Corbrays were looking to reward the Baelishes for some sort of service between the first two generations, it apparently wasn't enough to give them like an actual real lordship. Instead, they give them something like Standfast. It's a very small land. It's nothing going on economically. It is just like, yeah, I guess we can give you land, but we're not. What do we have available? Oh god, remember that keep on the fingers? Yeah, you guys can have that. You can imagine that it was not a gift that was the sort of thing to get excited about, but in a way it is, because it jumps them again in another social strata. This is going from sellsword, which is may as well be peasantry, to a knight, which is a little bit higher up, but then landed knight is a very important step up in terms of rights, in terms of what you can do in the culture, what you can aspire to. Laura 7 and in the chat says, we're talking about Baelish. A family took a huge leap for moving forever to Westeros. My question is, what terrible thing did they do in Braavos that they're running from? That's also a possibility. Maybe George will expand that as we see more from Peter, if he relates more of his family history. I'd expect that they just felt like they had no opportunities back in Braavos, and this was all they had. This was like the best option. It's like, I could go back to Braavos, spend this money, and not really go anywhere, or see what, maybe taking a shine to life in the Vale among the Corbrays, maybe a promise of always taking care of him, a steady life, would be very attractive maybe to a sellsword water dancer. Yeah, and the castle also doesn't have a name. Guilty Undertaker points out, you think somebody would give the castle a name. Well, it's not even a castle. It is basically just a watchtower. It's I was thinking about comparisons, and it's kind of like how the Tower of Joy is described. It is just a random watchtower, or Standfast, which we see from your Sir Eustace Osgray. That's basically all it is. It's one tower. There's a couple of floors. You can defend it a little bit, but nobody's going to attack it. It seems like it was just sort of made to stop pirates in the long past that has been converted for the Baelishes. Nobody may have held it for a long time, but I would expect that maybe this was like an older landed knight who died in the Blackfire Rebellions, and there was like, here you go. You guys can have this. So yeah, it's it's like I said, it's kind of unclear when this happened. I'm gonna guess the grandfather that earned a knighthood later earned the land. Although the irony is that in Baelish's hatred of this land is that he bemoans how this lone tower is stupid and awful and nowhere near as awesome as Winterfell or Riverrun or Castle Rock or all these amazing things. But kind of what he's failing to realize is that most of those houses started out with maybe a similar story to his own family. And their initial holdings were probably no more than this. Like Winterfell, when you look at it, it says the oldest keep is the first keep. And then it was built around the weirwood and then the cave structure. So like the difference between Winterfell, where it started, and where House Baelish is really not that different. It is just over time the family invested in itself, built it up, garnered power, and turned what were pretty lackluster holdings when they got them into seats of power. Like even Castle Rock, that was once just a mountain with some caves. Kind of funny when you're thinking about Littlefinger and he's like, oh, why wasn't I born highborn? Why wasn't I given all these things? So it's like Littlefinger has been given more opportunities than many, many others. Not where he wants to be. He wants to be like the Tullys, but this is still like an amazing gift to be a landed lord of any kind in Westeros. It is such a huge step up. Sophie B in the chat says, those ancient paramountcies are investments that matured over literally thousands of years, and he complains not having them only 4 generations in, which informs Baelish's lack of respect for history and also his amazing ambition that he wants to have in his life that does not see it that way. I mean, I'm not going to go out here and say that this tower and this land is awesome, but it's also not what most people in Westeros have, which is next to nothing. Or literally nothing. He calls it the Drear Fort. Yeah, all castles start off that way. I also find it interesting when you're thinking about how he bemoans that his home on the Fingers is so terrible and it sucks and he hates it basically. And he is so wealthy and he has amassed so much power that he just wants to completely leave it behind. He could invest in this land. He could maybe try to acquire more in the area, especially now that Lysa is the Lady of the Vale, and he has a good relationship with the Corbrays. Like, Littlefinger could be trying to improve what he has, and instead just completely seems to want to write it off. I don't know what kind of industry you could probably build in the Fingers in the Vale, but there's definitely a path forward for Littlefinger where he tries to actually become a great Lord of the Vale, and he completely just does not want to do that. He wants to take it in his own way. Yeah, he's a clout chaser. Yeah, exactly, Isabel. He wants to choose to take something from someone else rather than invest in his own land. Says a lot about him. Exactly. That he doesn't consider the hard work and the amazing rise of House Baelish in the Vale as something to be grateful for. He sees it as a hindrance, that they didn't go high enough for him to make his life better. There's ways he could have, I'm sure. A lot of that land is worth nothing. Maybe he could have bought it. Anyway, there's things he could have done. And then we get to Littlefinger's father. I don't think we learned his name. But this is a story very similar to the previous 2 generations of the House Baelish, which is that a Blackfire rebellion essentially allows another jump forward in the family. And that is the War of the Ninepenny Kings, more or less the last Blackfire rebellion with Maelys the Monstrous. Apparently, according to George, he answered a question about this in 2005 in a So Spake Martin, because they were asking about how did Littlefinger, from this really minor house from the Vale, ended up fostering at the Tullys. And George's answer is that Peter's father and Hoster met up during the War of the Ninepenny Kings and became friends. Littlefinger's father later cashed in on that friendship for a favor to get his son fostered at Riverrun, something that almost never happens. The fostering of someone that small to another region to a Lord Paramount is highly unusual. And again, it probably speaks to Littlefinger's political prowess, those of his grandfather and his great-grandfather, that this Lord Baelish, I guess he would have been maybe Sir Baelish, Lord Baelish, I guess he would have been called Lord Baelish, was able to, again, meet a High Lord, impress himself on him, become close friends, and then exploit that friendship for another jump forward in social standing, so that Peter, instead of being the Lord of the Fingers, or the littlest finger, basically, and trying to work within the Vale, instead gives him an enormous jump forward, an enormous head start, in that he's allowed to get to know and grow up with the Tully family, and presumably get to know many great lords, courtly culture, and get a world-class education in trying to be essentially higher than they are. Again, the ambition of the family comes through here. Again, thank you, Blackfires. Peter Baelish owes everything to the Blackfires. Continually, over and over and over again, House Baelish is built on the back of Blackfire rebellions, and them proving themselves in war, using that, impressing a lord, gaining more power for themselves. Let's see here. Oh, we're at 184 viewers. Thank you guys so much. 102 likes. Remember, 48 more. Put on the hat. If you haven't subscribed, do all those things. Yeah, he kind of got a scholarship. He got a scholarship out of it. He essentially got to... He basically got the life of a High Lord growing up, which is... informs a lot of Littlefinger's decision-making and his intelligence later in life, that this is what he grew up around. He didn't grow up around the sheep and the peat bogs. He grew up, obviously, with the Tullys, and Hoster Tully in particular, who is a fairly ruthless political mastermind himself. So you can imagine that, like, people wonder what Hoster Tully was like. How did he behave? Well, maybe Peter's a little bit like that. Maybe that's where he kind of got his political scheming and his sort of ruthlessness for trying to advance his own cause and that of his house. Hoster seems to be cut from the same sort of cloth. Kind of funny that that's not probably what you'd expect, but it's probably true. That they spend their money on being the right side of wars. You know, that is also true. I mean, you have to imagine that the Baelishes had little parts in those Blackfire rebellions. So essentially, when these wars came up, they just gambled their futures on it and said, all right, well, we'll just be loyalists, and God help us. I hope we make it. Super chat here from Vampirus99. Thank you so much for the $5. Super generous. War creates chaos, and its chaos is a ladder. Exactly. The ladder the Baelishes climbed up was war, which, when you think about Littlefinger's current plan, it seems like more it's a family plan and less than something he came up with. Just a different way of fighting, I guess. Let's see here. Yeah, I also wanted to point out again, you can probably imagine this relationship being something like Bronn and Tyrion, between Baelish's father and Hoster Tully, or perhaps Bronn and Jaime from the show. That one probably maybe closer to the truth, because Jaime actually rewards Bronn in a much bigger way than Tyrion, although Tyrion promised to. And you can also, again, see probably shades of Littlefinger's behavior in his father, that his abilities with manipulating lords, his flattery, his proving himself in ways that his lords will notice, being smooth talkers, being popular, making themselves invaluable to the Highborn, it seems to be sort of the House Baelish family plan. You know, find powerful lord, become friends with him, prove your worth, and then extract something of that seems very small from them, but actually ends up being quite big. A knighthood is an enormous step forward for most people. So is getting land, so is being fostered with a great lord. So they've done an amazing job jumping forwards. So I think that's very interesting for thinking about how George wrote this backstory and how it relates to Littlefinger. That Littlefinger sort of seems like the sort of person that is individually unique and super intelligent and nobody like him in the world. But then you kind of look at the rest of his family and their history, and it's like, well, no, he's kind of just running back the same plan. He's doing the same things they did. It's just that instead of proving himself on the battlefield, instead of being the guy with the Titan of Braavos on his shield, he's instead decided a different way that he can make himself be noticed, basically. Oh, question here from Flinted Steel. I am broke, so can't super chat. Don't worry about it. But do you see any connection between House Baelish was founded and Tyrion deals with the Second Sons about lands and gold? Absolutely. You can definitely see that kind of relationship. Finding a lord down on their luck or someone in a time of need and getting to promise more than they probably would have otherwise. But yeah, definitely. Tyrion's relationship to sellswords is probably identical to the Baelish's relationship to the Corbrays and the Arryns. So this is where we get to the part that my patron Ramona wanted to talk about, and she has some tinfoil, specifically about House Baelish and where they came from in Braavos. So the basics of it is that they wonder if the Baelishes are more than they seem, if maybe there's something a little dragonish in their backstory. So I'm just going to read it out here. It says, I assume you're aware of the theories starting way back in the 80s, recently confirmed by geneticists, accordingly to which all people of European heritage are descending from Charlemagne. Basically true. Also, I think William the Conqueror, as well as every individual who's able to have children around the 10th century in Europe. I suspect Gurm was quite fond of the theories, as everybody in the Song of Ice and Fire seems to have a drop or two of Targaryen blood. Starting from there, I'd love to see a take on Littlefinger's Targaryen lineage. I have reasons to believe he is the descendant of Aelena Targaryen and Aegon IV, through Viserys Plum, perchance also descendant of Aegon's Braavosi bastards. Yes, put on your tinfoil hats. This is definitely a tinfoil hat thing. So these are their arguments, Ramona's arguments. They say both Aelena and Petyr were small for their age as children, both very good with counting coppers. Petyr's mother is named Elaine, which kind of sounds like Aelena. Petyr owns a plum coat. Elena's hair has a particular gold strike. Brown Ben Plum, a known descendant of hers, has a salt and pepper striped beard, and Petyr has gray threads running through his hair. Boy, I guess I'm a secret Targaryen too with that one. I got all that gray hair. The above-mentioned Ben has mixed Braavosi and Westerosi heritage. One of Aegon's Braavosi bastards is called Balerion. The first Baelish to arrive in Westeros could have been a less fortunate son of him. So basically, the theory goes that maybe some sort of down-on-their-luck bastard of Aegon IV became a sellsword and made their way back to Westeros. That is some tinfoil. So for one thing, this is a pretty cramped timeline for this to happen. If we're assuming like general generational time, we're looking at the first Baelish coming to Westeros during the first Blackfire Rebellion, which would have been about 190 to 200 AC. So you're assuming that any child of this generation would have had to immediately have children, and in order for them to become this sort of sellsword running to Westeros. There's also sort of the problem that the Braavosi bastards are the Black Pearl and her children after her, which have very dark, Summer Islandish features, which Littlefinger has none of. It doesn't mean, though, that it can't happen, where obviously we see examples like with Baelor Breakspear, along with Nettles, where Targaryens, even within the same family, with the same parents, can swap between being super pale and having darker features. So doesn't exactly rule it out. That does not rule it out. So the main problem, again, is the timeline. If we're talking about when Aegon would have had a bastard, and then with the Black Pearl, and then the Black Pearl having a child, which Ramon is assuming it would be Balerion Otherys, which is the name of Black Pearl's family, is Otherys. So that would be a very quick turnaround on another kid. But there is one thing in this favor, and that is, this is not something I've really talked about so far, but Baelish is a really unusual name, especially coming out of Braavos. There's obviously a lot of connections between Peter Baelish and Bael the Bard of Northern legend, but if you're talking about, in particular, Valyrian names and Targaryen names, the Bael name is very prominent. You obviously have Baela Targaryen, Baelor Targaryen, Baelon Targaryen, and also Balerion the Black Dread, who the Black Pearl's son is named after. Yes, also Bael the Demon. So that their name is Baelish, it kind of makes you wonder if George is making a secret joke about perhaps there being some kind of Valyrian descent or Targaryen descent within their family. The AE, that particular, that language, I mean, those two letters next to each other usually means Valyrian in the history. So, that's something in its favor, that if you're talking about like what we would be looking for, I think the names are very interesting. I don't know. My main criticism of this, of the tinfoil theory, is that secret ambitious Targaryens are very, very rarely shy about saying who they are. In fact, we usually get the other way, that people claim to be Targaryens or Valyrians when they are not. And we don't hear anything about that from House Baelish. They didn't take on their sigil, it's just the Titan of Braavos. It's not like a Black Pearl with harkening back to the Otherys. It's not anything related to a dragon for the Targaryens or the Valyrians. It's just the Titan of Braavos. So it's possible maybe they are in like some weird way, but if you're aware of it, I think you would try and play it up. Although on the other side of this, the fact that they were able to so quickly integrate themselves into Westerosi culture may imply that Peter's great-grandfather knew something of Westerosi culture before he jumped ship. So I guess that's an argument in favor of it. But, there's a lot of Valyrian names out there that aren't necessarily Targaryens. Like, they're just a small subset. We know that there are loads of Valyrians still out there throughout the Valyrian daughters. Especially in Braavos. It's kind of a melting pot culture. It doesn't have to be necessarily a relation to Aegon IV or the Black Pearl or Rhaena Targaryen for maybe the very slight, intelligent Baelishes who very quickly rose through their culture and through Westerosi culture to be related to a Valyrian. That could very well be true, especially since Baelish does not particularly look like the rest of the Braavosi we meet. So, although they've been for 4 generations breeding in the Vale, so that's not really that surprising. Oh yes, also the Longwaters. Yeah, there's all sorts of ways for Valyrian blood to come out of Braavos. The Targaryens were not quite a lot of their bastards and such made their way to Esso, so totally possible. If it's true, I would guess they were not aware of it. Although it does set up a really interesting thing if Varys is a Blackfire is actually true. Because this would be super interesting if Baelish and Varys are enemies and they're actually like a Targaryen and Blackfire fighting each other without really knowing it. That would be the kind of thing George would probably revel. And there's also the idea that the Peter himself has bought brothels and he's a skilled merchant. So, you know, it could be. Like, if he's connected to the Black Pearl, who was known as a famous courtesan, that would be something interesting for George to play on. I don't think so. I appreciate the tinfoil, but, you know, tinfoil's fun. So let's grab a question from... We're about an hour in, so let's grab a question from Patreon. And maybe a few from the chat, and then we'll finish up the rest of the outline. So, let's see here. Eric F., a frequent patron questioner. Thank you so much, Eric, for all your good questions. Did Baelish face any penalty from Hoster impregnating Lysa? It appears... So we're going to get to this later. But yes, Littlefinger did impregnate Lysa. She was forced to drink moon tea to abort the child, and then he was sent home, essentially, after he healed up. And it seems like Hoster's punishment for Littlefinger was essentially to banish him back to the Fingers, and remove him from Catelyn, Lysa, and Edmure, his only friends in the world, and essentially say, we're done with you. I don't know if he... Maybe it was sort of a little punishment that Hoster even let the duel happen with Brandon and Littlefinger. You can maybe see that in sort of... Like, if you let Brandon Stark duel Peter Baelish, you know he's going to get his ass kicked. So, very possibly that Hoster let it happen, hoping maybe Peter would die or be injured, like, learn his place sort of thing, and then sends him back to the Vale. So, that seems to be kind of the punishment. Oh, sorry, Sasuke, you're missing the stream. Make sure to like it so you get closer to that quotient. Yeah, slam the like button. Yeah, Hoster's punishment seems to be denial of the highborn life he was living. And just like, get out of my face, kid. But also recognizing that Littlefinger was only like 14 or 15, so maybe if he was older, he would have had him killed, but perhaps he thought this was like, we're done with you, that kind of thing. Let's see here. Kate K from the patron Slack asked, given the information he currently has in the status of the world, how is he achieving his endgame? Littlefinger's endgame is something that's debated a lot in the fandom, and I was going to get into that a little bit more in just a few minutes further down in my outline. But his endgame is sort of, I sort of perceive it as a just total destruction of the Tullys and the Starks, and himself being above them. Because he's already gotten his revenge on Cat. He's already gotten his revenge on Hoster and Edmure and Lysa and Ned Stark and Brandon Stark. Like, those are already done, but he's still pushing for something. And it seems to be that he wants to essentially upend the feudal structure in which Littlefinger is below those families. He wants to become a Lord Paramount. He wants to, like, I think he wants to have a member of House Stark and House Tully essentially get on their knees and beg for his help, and be in a position where nobody could ever treat him like that again. It seems to be that Littlefinger, like, there have been some very out there theories that, like, Littlefinger wants Harrenhal because it has a lot of weirwoods and Littlefinger's maybe magical. I don't think that's true. I think very much we're supposed to see Littlefinger as somebody who faced particular traumas in his young age that he never really got over, and is continually trying to right that wrong that was done to him. Sarah Charles says, revenge for the duel. Yeah. I think that's correct. Not only revenge for the duel, but revenge for Catelyn rejecting him. Yeah, I don't buy the Littlefinger has like a weirwood like magic, supernatural plan to him. He seems very much a worldly villain, not a supernatural villain. Steven Stark, also from the Patron Slack, I believe he's playing Dungeons and Dragons right now. Is Littlefinger hoarding all that food to simply drive up the price? Is he saving it to feed an army of sellswords from Bravos? So this is something that he's been doing in the current times, where he's been essentially hanging on to grain and refusing to sell to anybody. Oh. Okay, there we go. And why is he doing that? I think in one situation, if he hoards all the grain, that ends up putting him in a position of power as the wars go on, because everybody needs food. If Littlefinger's the only one that has it, then he can charge whatever price he wants for it, greatly increases his wealth, but also increases his bargaining position with any lords going forwards. Because the main reason for the Lannister-Tyrell alliance is their soldiers, but also the fact that they're the breadbasket of Westeros, that they can supply their armies and their supply lines for whatever they need to do. And Littlefinger, I think, is trying to essentially mimic that. I don't think he's saving it to feed an army of sellswords from Bravos. I think Littlefinger has essentially divorced himself entirely from his Bravosi identity. He kind of wants nothing to do with them. I don't think he's part of any kind of like large-scale conspiracy theory where he's going to help the Bravosi invade and take revenge or something like that. It's like there doesn't seem to be much of a connection between them anymore, except for like a mercantile alliance sort of thing, and perhaps maybe something with the Faceless Men. But yeah, I don't think it's to help the Bravosi. I think it is, as in all things, it is to help Littlefinger, that he's essentially coring the market on a scarce, valuable resource. Good point by Luminous Rain. Mercantile lords came out on top during the French Revolution too. Yeah, holding the food in times of war is a very, very good idea. And Littlefinger, for his many, many faults, is an exceptionally smart person, and very, very clever about knowing where to place himself in order to be valuable, in order to jump another social strata. Like, even when you think about where he started from, being just fostered in the Vale, that's something that could make you like a courtier for the rest of your life. But Littlefinger instead jumps from that, and even an embarrassment and almost dying, and he goes from there to Master of Coin, from there to a customs officer, from there to Master of Coin, to the Small Council, to being a Lord of Westeros. So that seems to be Littlefinger's whole thing. The hoarding of the food is another example of this plan. Yes, many, 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 many faults. Littlefinger is a terrible, terrible person. Let's grab one from the chat. Only Shadowkin says, wasn't he trying to fulfill prophecy somewhere with the red-haired daughter in Harrenhal? No, I don't think that has anything to do with that. I don't think Littlefinger is like trying to acquire skin changer magic or anything like that. I think he likes the red hair because Cat had red hair. I think he wants Harrenhal because it's an important, massive castle with history, and he has the money to fix it if he wants to. There's no indication that Littlefinger is like hungry for magic or hungry for prophecy. He's hungry for power, and that's what Harrenhal and the Vale and with taking Sansa Stark and marrying Lysa Tully, that's what those give him. They don't give him like the Isle. I don't think he gives a shit about the Isle of Faces. He cares about the power Harrenhal represents. Oh, super chat here from Amanda, aka Disputed Lambs. Thank you so much for the $5. Very, very generous. Hey, Matt. I'm trying to do an Amanda impression. I did a bad one. Will Harry the Heir survive the Winds of Winter? Maybe. I don't think he's going to survive a Dream of Spring. It seems that Harry the Heir is an impediment to Littlefinger. He's being propped up by the Royces and the Lord Declaran as an alternative to Littlefinger and Robert Arryn and Lysa. So one way or another, I think Harry the Heir is probably not going to make it out alive. He just seems like the kind of character that Littlefinger would take a lot of delight in killing or bringing, just destroying. In a lot of ways, I talked about this during my the Secret Children of Brandon Stark thing. Harry the Heir is very similar to Brandon in character. He's very similar to him in terms of his sexuality. He's very similar to him in terms of even his position in the culture and his strength. So I would think that Littlefinger would probably see a lot of Brandon and Harry and take a lot of joy in destroying that person. Oh, good point, Ramona. I think Sansa wishes him to fall and break his neck, and she's good with foreshadowing deaths. Yeah, Sansa is kind of a foreshadowing machine in that way. I could definitely see that happening. Oh, interesting. That's a good connection, Guilty Undertaker. Littlefinger wants to marry Sansa to him, then cuckold Harry and have him have an accident. Maybe him reliving the relationship between Brandon and Kat, where he wanted to carry on with Kat even though she was married or going to be married in like secret. A Bael the Bard again, that kind of thing. I could definitely see that be how he imagines it's going to play out, and it definitely won't. Littlefinger ain't going to go super well for him. So let's move forward to Peter Baelish's life, taking into account his history and his ancestors and what George is telling us about this family. And we find Peter, who is very, very unlike his ancestors in very particular ways. And rather than being sort of the skillful, brave water dancer who made their bones on fighting in wars and so probably being sort of tough guys or very honorable, very valuable in sort of a military way, we get Peter, who is, he's pretty small, he's pretty short, he doesn't seem to have any prowess with the sword, he doesn't even seem interested with it. His mother was apparently a commoner, perhaps. We only know her name is Elaine, which also gets the weird things when that's the name that he gave Sansa Stark. Creepy Finger shows up. There's no house mentioned for who she is. Again, he's nicknamed Littlefinger, mostly because of, well, it's kind of a joke on his size, but it's also a joke on where he comes from. The Dreer Fort, as it's called, is on the smallest of the Vale's fingers, so they call him Littlefinger in that way. Some people have taken that as maybe a joke on his sword size, as it were, which I'm sure would be interesting. Oh, 2 super chats in a row from Vampirus99. $20 total. Thank you so much. I don't see Baelish's motivation as getting revenge on Catelyn. I see that in terms of House Tully and House Stark. His behavior towards Sansa as an avatar of Catelyn has a different motivation. He shows a dissonance between being a father and potential lover or partner. Baelish wants to rather usurp Houses Stark and Tully while trying to imagine and create a way that he can have Catelyn or Sansa. Yeah, I'll get that in a little bit, but I think there is definitely some part of him that wants revenge on Catelyn in his own way for the rejection that he feels, particularly from her. Whether or not it's like what he wants to do to Ned Stark, I don't think so. I think there's something very different he has in mind for Catelyn, and through, like you say, through Sansa, the one he sees as Catelyn come again. There's definitely, though, some very complicated feelings with Peter towards Sansa, where he can't seem to decide which role he wants to play for her, and in which way he wants to use her, for lack of a better word. Yeah, just stay away from Sansa. It is gross. Especially because Sansa's age and the power he has over her. It's basically a power fantasy that he's running through Sansa. He wants power over Sansa in the way that he never had it over Catelyn, I think. But again, thank you for the comments. You can imagine that when we're talking about his Braavosi ancestors, that there may be some source of shame in Peter that he lacks these martial prowess, that the skills that gave his family the leg up in the Vale, that got them knighted, that got them land, he seemingly does not have at all. He's kind of like an odd duck within the Baelish family. And again, with his father, who seemingly fought in the War of Ninepenny Kings, made a good account of himself, became friends with Hoster Tully, these are things that Littlefinger just doesn't have. It doesn't seem like that was ever in the cards for him. You can maybe see something like the relationship between Randall Tarly and Samwell Tarly between Littlefinger and his father. Maybe not quite as harsh, but clearly Littlefinger's father wanted to have a different life for him than he clearly had, sent him off to the Tullys. Sent him a kingdom away. Essentially sent him to boarding school. But you can definitely imagine how his relationship to his ancestors and his father is one of he doesn't feel a part of them, that he feels like they are other people. Although, as I pointed out as we're talking about them, that they probably have more in common than he thinks. It's just that they do push their advantages in different ways, that kind of thing. Only 20 more likes. 192 people watching. We got about 40 minutes left. 20 likes right there. Put on the Gandalf hat. So Littlefinger gets fostered at Riverrun, as I talked about earlier. This was a favor from Hoster Tully to Littlefinger's father. And Littlefinger gets raised with the Tully children. He becomes infatuated, right away with Catelyn Stark. He sees her, and it's like, that's it. Littlefinger wants to do nothing else in his life than be around, and later, as he develops, obviously, into a teenager, to be with Catelyn Tully. She is all he wants in the world. But he also was, of course, very good friends with Lysa Tully and also Edmure Tully. Grew up playing games with them. He describes it as kissing games. Gets kind of gross, but sometimes this is a thing that kids do, I guess. He apparently tries to French them both. Tries to give him French kisses. Only Lysa is open to it. Catelyn is not. This one's for you, Maester Mary. We're going to call that his dangerous arbitrage, trying to make out with Catelyn Tully. Spin the bottle. These were children's games, that kind of thing. But he becomes essentially a member of the family. He becomes very close to all of them. Not so much Hoster Tully. We don't hear much about their relationship, but it may have been like, it seems like Littlefinger may have looked up to Hoster in some way, because he seems to have adopted his worldview and his way of dealing with politics. But he also becomes close in particular to Brynden Tully, who he sees as his almost like a surrogate father or an older brother figure. That's who he went to when he needed advice. That's who he went to when he was feeling down or things weren't going his way. He would run to Brynden, and Brynden would pat him on the head and say, "It's all right, Peter." Dre Gadsby, definitely can talk about that. And that's actually further down on my doc. You're beating me to it. Jay Gadsby is definitely a character that Littlefinger's very, very like. What do the French call French kissing? Freedom kissing. That's what they call it. So again, as I was talking about, Peter falls in love with particularly Catelyn Tully. We get the story from Catelyn that one time they were traveling and they stopped at Old Stones, and she remembers the time that they played at being Duncan, Prince of Dragonflies, and Jenny of Old Stones. It's pretty clear that Catelyn saw this as a harmless memory, but it wasn't harmless for Peter. With the difference in their social standings and the fact that he would probably never get the ability to marry somebody like Catelyn Tully, seeing seeing himself and her in sort of a gender inverted version of Duncan the Prince of Dragonflies and Jenny of Oldstones is something that he probably held very dear to his heart, and probably still does. That story and that memory is probably very painful for him, that he was not able to overcome the differences in their upbringing. It's one of those things where it's like, oh, I thought we were just playing a game. Well, one of you was playing a game. Catelyn was just playing a game. Littlefinger was playing out the future he wants. And this is kind of where we get into what George thinks about Littlefinger, what he thinks about Peter Baelish, where he comes from. And as wait, who said that further up? Who said Jay Gatsby? Guilty Undertaker. Littlefinger, according to George, is very similar to Jay Gatsby from the book The Great Gatsby. Let's see here. George answered this question on Not a Blog a while back. He got a question about the kind of obvious comparisons between Jay Gatsby and Littlefinger, and he says, yes, there's a lot of Gatsby and Littlefinger. Book Littlefinger, anyway. TV Littlefinger is a different sort of creature. Gotta love George making sure to draw the difference between the two characters. But yeah, Littlefinger in the books is super different than Aidan Gillen's. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. His version of Littlefinger in the show, where that's more of like a they call like a mustache twirling, scheming, obvious villain. But Littlefinger in the books is much more a people pleaser. He very much wants to be harmless. He very much wants to be perceived as helpful and friendly, and he wants to be indispensable to the wealthy and the High Lords. And that's sort of what you get from Jay Gatsby, where Gatsby started off with a similar story where he had a crush on Daisy as a younger man, couldn't end up getting her because, again, differences in their social stratas, and then Jay spent the rest of his life trying to essentially ascend to her level to attract her back. And he's very much in the vein of these figures, and very much like that story of Jay Gatsby, and that, in particular, that they are willing to do immoral or illegal things in order to get to that place where they can get back the woman that they love that doesn't love them back, thinking that this is sort of a funny thing, but it's like Littlefinger very much thinks that the problem between him and Catelyn is that, oh, he's Littlefinger from the Vale, and it's like, that's not the problem, dude. Let's see here. Santavia Major says, Jay Gatsby is likable and not creepy or villainous. I think this is an important point, though, that Littlefinger is not exactly Jay Gatsby. He's like him, and he shares the basic plot structure. He shares the basic relationship between himself and where he's coming from and where he's aspiring to. But this is sort of a germified version of Jay Gatsby, if you will, where it's not one-to-one. George took this basic character who just wanted to be everybody's friend for these lavish parties, and used that to gain political and social power. But then George twisted it more and made him more murderous, made him more villainous, made him more unlikable. But on the surface, the relationship between most people at court and Littlefinger of the books is very similar to the way that the people in high society felt about Gatsby. Yeah, it's more deconstruction, not a one-to-one. There was also a really good post by the user, I don't know if you guys know Cantus. I think he's coming up soon on Gray Area's Obsidian Knights podcast, but he's one of the really great writers in the Song of Ice and Fire fandom. He's got a lot of great theories, and he brought up the comparison as well between Littlefinger and the story Wuthering Heights. I'm going to drop that in the chat. I'll probably put it in the description. This is sort of the thing that you guys can read later on your own time. I'm not super familiar with Wuthering Heights, but this looks like an awesome post. And again, it seems like George is calling on this classic literary story and figure in order to make his own version of them. Oh yeah, only Shadowkin in the chat says, same vein as Count of Monte Cristo. Yeah, that Count of Monte Cristo might be closer in terms of the revenge fantasies and what he's trying to do with his newfound power. Bless you, Cantus. You know all the awesome things. Kind of makes me want to go back and read those. I think I read them kind of in high school, but I didn't do very well in high school English. I didn't like the stories very much. I was a much younger, more impetuous version of myself. And yeah, I didn't pay too much attention. Although I probably should. Yeah, this Littlefinger, book Littlefinger, should be much more understood in those, in the idea of these characters, George taking a take on them or deconstructing them, rather than the show version, which is just like almost like Jafar from Aladdin, like just a pure villain who's twirling his mustache and plotting revenge for anybody. He's a very different kind of character, and one that very much wants to be seen in a positive light by those around him. And actually, you can sort of see this in, well, we'll talk about the we'll talk about the Sojourn a little bit. So what ends up happening is, obviously, Littlefinger and Catelyn doesn't end up happening, and then at Catelyn's betrothal to Brandon Stark, Littlefinger gets 6 dances with her the night of her betrothal, and then tries to make out with her in front of Brandon Stark, in front of Hoster Tully. Doesn't work. Catelyn says no to this. Littlefinger responds by getting outrageously drunk, passes out, and the Blackfish picks him up and carries him to bed, having embarrassed himself thoroughly at Catelyn's betrothal to what will be a form of future Lord Paramount. This is where some of the weird stuff happens. So while Littlefinger is passed out drunk, Lysa Arryn, who of the two, Lysa Tully, one of the Tully sisters actually likes Littlefinger quite a lot, sneaks up and essentially, just like, there's no other word for it, she basically just rapes him while he's asleep and drunk. He wakes up in the middle of it. He thinks it's Cat. For years later, he tells people that he took Cat's maidenhead, thinking of this memory, not realizing that because he was drunk, he misidentified which Tully sister it was. Lysa also gets pregnant from this encounter. We learn later that Hoster Tully found out and forced Lysa to take moon tea in order to kill the pregnancy. The moon tea almost killed Lysa. Apparently she had a very bad reaction to it. This whole encounter seems to be what drove the relationship between Hoster Tully and Brynden Blackfish to the brink and ended up destroying their relationship as brothers because of the way Hoster treats Lysa in these moments. Lysa ends up getting married off to Jon Arryn in the Vale, and the Blackfish leaves with her and basically never talks to Hoster again afterwards. I imagine they probably fought over the marriage of Lysa to Jon Arryn. Not cool, not nice, Hoster. We got that question earlier about, like, was there revenge taken on Littlefinger by Hoster? Yes, in a way, but there's also definitely seems to be revenge taken on Lysa by her father. That he loses, he just like stops caring about her kind of, and just sees her as a political tool after that point. Oh, I guess we were only four more likes. Slam that like button, guys. So then we get to the duel with Brandon Stark after the whole getting drunk and passing out and the Lysa Arryn thing happens. Oh, there we go. Apparently all I have to do is mention it. Let me grab this without knocking over my stuff. I did it. There we go. Gandalf hat acquired. Ah. Let's see here. So we're at 157. We get to, let's say 180. I'll put on the Gurm hat. So the duel happens with Brandon Stark. Littlefinger, who, very much like Sansa, seems to be somebody that believes very deeply in the idea of stories and living out myths and legends, tries to duel Brandon Stark for Catelyn's hand. Brandon, by this point, is actually 22 years old. He's a broad, strapping man. Not like Ned Stark, closer to like Robert Baratheon dimensions, maybe not in hype in terms of military prowess and his size. And decides he's going to be the hero of legend. He's going to be the one to free Catelyn Tully from her evil marriage to this brutish northerner. Doesn't go well for Littlefinger. Cat begs Brandon and Peter not to go through with it, but Brandon Stark is not one to turn down a duel. He shows up actually in his full armor, and when he sees Littlefinger in the crappy little armor he has, Brandon decides to make it a little bit fairer and takes off his armor to match Littlefinger's. Although, knowing how Littlefinger thinks about this later, he may have seen that as an insult. That, like, Brandon was like, oh, look at this chump. I don't need all this armor to kill Littlefinger, which is, you know, absolutely true. He did not need any help to smack down Littlefinger. And it seems that this moment is like the birth of a supervillain for Littlefinger, because not only does Cat take Brandon's side, but also Edmure Tully. Rather than supporting his childhood friend in this time of need, Edmure acts as the squire for Brandon Stark. Brandon and also Hoster Tully allows this duel to go on, which he probably didn't have to. Brandon carves him up like a Thanksgiving turkey. He easily wins the duel and almost kills Littlefinger, giving him that brutal scar up his torso. Littlefinger refuses to see any of his, now what he considers his former friends, while he's recovering. As soon as he's well, Hoster puts him in a carriage and sends him back to the Vale, hoping basically to never see him again. Also, you have to keep in mind this is probably revenge for Lysa Tully and getting her pregnant. And from Hoster's perspective, you can see this, that not only did Littlefinger almost destroy his ability to marry off Lysa for political gain, but he almost destroyed his alliance to the north. Like, if he had killed Brandon Stark in that duel, what would Hoster have done? So, yeah, you can see Hoster was pretty angry about this. Littlefinger, though, kind of refuses to take the L on this one, refuses to take the loss. Once he gets back to the Vale, he recovers, he's well again, he's at the Dreer Fort, as he calls it. Decides that he is done moping over getting absolutely housed by Brandon Stark, and will rise to the level that he could actually have Catelyn / get revenge on the rest of her family, Catelyn in his own way, and decides that he's going to take advantage of the thing that he never liked before, the fact that Lysa's the one that actually is interested in him among the Tully sisters. He continues this relationship. You can probably assume he started sleeping with her as soon as he could. After Lysa's marriage to Jon Arryn, Littlefinger convinces her through Arryn to get him the job as the customs official in Goldtown, and he is super successful at this in ways that you have to imagine are just outright corruption, theft, all the things we know he does as the master of coin. He shows this amazing talent that he can just rub his hands together and gold falls out, essentially setting himself up as as kind of a villain, a villain of money. Shady deals, lots of corruption. You can imagine that he took all the bribes while he was a customs official, gave only some back to the state, kept most of them himself. That kind of relationship. Actually, let me be. What do you think of the theory that Sweet Robin is Littlefinger's child? We know that they kept their relationship going for quite some time. There is definitely the theory out there that Jon Arryn was not just investigating King Robert's bastard children, but he may have gotten tuned into the idea that, hey, isn't it weird that my kid, Robert Arryn, definitely my son, doesn't look like me at all? Because when you look at Lysa Tully and Jon Arryn's blonde. Jon Arryn is blonde and blue-eyed. Lysa Tully has red brownish hair and I believe blue eyes as well. Robert Arryn comes out with dark brown hair and I believe not blue eyes. So if Jon Arryn, his seed is strong comment is about how he's discovered that basically that there's an inheritance problem with genetics between Robert and Cersei, he may have discovered the same about himself with his wife, and that may be why he had to die. Maybe from Littlefinger's perspective. Robert Arryn definitely has a body type that is more like Littlefinger's, the slight small child. Timing works out that he may actually be a Bael the Bard kind of thing, where much like his plan that he wanted to go through with Catelyn and Brandon, and maybe trying to do in the future with Sansa and Harry the Heir, that he decided that, you know what, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to cuckold the hell out of Jon Arryn. I'm going to knock up Lysa again. And it seems like she was all for it. It's certainly an interesting theory, considering the fact that they were carrying on a relationship this whole time, a sexual relationship. Very possible. I would find it interesting if that was like a subplot to the whole Jon Arryn thing, that he actually found out about Littlefinger and Lysa, and Littlefinger was like, fuck, I gotta kill him. Or maybe Lysa found out. But using this relationship with Lysa, obviously Littlefinger gets her to get him a place at court when Jon is brought to court after Robert's Rebellion, becomes Master of Coin, and eventually a place on the Small Council. And then we get sort of Littlefinger in the current time frame, where there's like almost too much to talk about with Littlefinger's actions in the current story, because this was specifically looking back on his history, his relationship to these things. I thought this would be a good time to talk about his Mockingbird sigil, where despite the fact that House Baelish has this like great history of being strong warriors, of making themselves known to their lords as people that can be depended on, that they are effective in combat. Again, Littlefinger had none of that he did not seem to inherit that from his parents, or at least from his mother. So for him, it may have been that the Titan's head was the sort of thing that was almost mocking him, because it's a callback to something he does not share. He doesn't have these abilities. And it also may have been a problem for Littlefinger, because as he felt as though he was an outsider a lot of his life, especially being the lowly Littlefinger in the court of the Tullys, that showing off that he's not even Westerosi, that he's Bravosi in origin, could have been a thing he wanted to get rid of in order to kind of make himself seem more likable and more part of Westerosi culture. That I saw some people in the chat were talking about earlier. The Mockingbird is mostly known for a bird that makes fun of other birds in a way, where they're exceptional at mimicking the bird calls of other birds in order to mess with them. And that seems to be maybe what Littlefinger is playing on. I also saw a Reddit post about this, where they're talking about how the Mockingbird is not a native species to Westeros, I guess. I don't really know about that, but I thought that was an interesting connection if true. That Littlefinger's he is essentially distancing himself from his family and his ancestry as much as he can. He wants nothing to do with the Drearfort, as he calls it. He wants nothing to do with the Fingers. He wants to forget his time with the Tullys, basically, except for when he brags about the time that he took Catelyn Coley's maidenhead. Did not happen. Yeah, he just doesn't want this connection to Braavos. He doesn't want this connection to his great-grandfather, his grandfather, his father. John Moore, I had the stream muted because my wife came in to talk to me and I left the room. Came back in and Matt has a wizard hat on. Yeah. I do have a wizard hat on. Look at that. And it seems to be that Littlefinger, in his response to Brandon Stark absolutely destroying him, he decided that he would try and win in this different way. I think in the show, I'm not sure if this is repeated in the books, but he said, like, I would never play their game again. And the Mockingbird seems to be his way of doing that. That he's going to be everybody's best friend until he's not, and then stab a knife in their back, which ends up being what happens. Oh, good myth here from Amanda. The myth of the first Mockingbird was a man who wanted to be ruler of them all and use his gift of voice to kill people. Seems like a good fit. Yeah, Littlefinger also is a great talker. There's a lot of language about the way he talks about singing songs. So, again, Bael the Bard idea, but basically that he entrances the court with letting them hear what they want to while it ends up helping himself. There's also been some ideas I've seen in the fandom that Littlefinger is against the feudal culture and he's bringing it down to be like a capitalist and trying to destroy feudalism. I don't think that's actually true. Littlefinger more seems to be that he wants to have a total mastery of the feudal system because that's what he knows. He doesn't want to tear it down because then he would lose his one edge he has over the stupid lords, and that he is smart and able to use it against them, kind of like Euron Greyjoy does with the Ironborn culture. He just wants to elevate himself, destroy his rivals, and become better than them rather than actively remaking the culture in a different way. Oh, do I think he'll lose his tongue? You know what? Let's talk about that now. Talking about the Winds of Winter in House Baelish, there's a few quotes that are super interesting in terms of foreshadowing. We know in the show that Littlefinger ended up getting caught in his lies by Sansa and Arya. Arya kills him. There's definitely parts of that will not be the same. Obviously, the Jane Poole Sansa merger won't happen. But the idea that Littlefinger will probably rally the Knights of the Vale, maybe around Harry the Heir, maybe around Robert Arryn to go north to help Sansa reclaim Winterfell is definitely something that's on the table, especially since Littlefinger has in the past essentially daydreamed about going to Winterfell and again getting revenge on the Starks some more. And there's two quotes here that are super interesting, especially because they relate to Sansa. And like we were talking about earlier, how Sansa is sometimes a foreshadowing machine. This is from the Ghost of Highheart, one of her prophecies. She says, I dreamt a wolf howling in the rain, but no one heard his grief. I believe that is Greywind. I dreamt a clangor. I dreamt such a clangor, I thought my head might burst, drums and horns and pipes and screams, but the saddest sound was the little bells, Red Wedding. I dreamt of a maid at a feast with purple serpents in her hair, venom dripping from the fangs, that is Sansa's hairnet being used to kill Joffrey, and then, later I dreamt that maid again slaying a savage giant in a castle built of snow. That last one had puzzled readers for a while, but then we get a callback to this in an Elaine chapter, and this is when Sansa was in the Eyrie and she was building a snow castle version of Winterfell, and Robert Arryn comes out and starts messing with her, and they get into a little fight, and this is the line that happens. A mad rage seized hold of her. She picked up a broken branch and smashed the torn doll's head down on top of it, then pushed it down atop the shattered gatehouse of her snow castle. The servants looked aghast, but when Littlefinger saw what she'd done, he laughed. I don't know if you should laugh at this one, Littlefinger. If the tales be true, that's not the first giant to end up with its head on Winterfell's walls. Those were only stories, she said, and left him there. Now, this one takes a little bit of thought to piece it together, but the basic idea is you have to remember that Littlefinger's actual family sigil is a Titan's head, a Titan, a giant. Those are cognates for each other, basically. Or synonyms? Synonyms. That's the right word. So Like Amanda says in the chat, there's definitely this idea in the fandom that Littlefinger will get caught at some point by Sansa, and he will be executed and his head placed on the walls of Winterfell like giants in the past. That the Titan's head, not the giant's head, will be the one on the gates of Winterfell, and that the ghost of Highheart, when seeing this dream, did not differentiate between giant and Titan. Yeah, heads on spikes. Again, we'll probably see some version of Littlefinger rallying the Knights of the Vale and the Lord's Declarant, but I don't think Jon Royce is going to stand for Littlefinger as long as he did in the show. And Harry the Heir, again, as I said before, stands as a problem for Littlefinger. House Royce wants to use Harry to replace Robert Arryn, who they maybe suspect is not Jon Arryn's, but is definitely sickly and the tool that Littlefinger is using to rule the Vale. Harry the Heir has a much closer relationship to the Royces and the Declarants, so there's definitely some foreshadowing there that the giant with his head on a castle built of snow, Winterfell. The other ones were also highly symbolic when they eventually converted into the real versions, and all of them have come true. So we expect to see a giant's head of some kind on the gates of Winterfell. Littlefinger's is the one I think that probably the theory that makes the most sense. Whew. All right, so we got about 15 minutes left. I'm gonna finish up some of the questions from patrons, but you guys can just start throwing questions at me. We'll see what we can do with the what we got left over from Littlefinger and House Baelish and all that stuff. I see you guys are talking about the theory that, oh no, the poison was meant for Tyrion instead of Joffrey. No, that is not true. I know it's a fun theory, but it makes no sense, and also not true. It wasn't the pie. I know this is a popular theory. Absolutely not. The poison was meant for Joffrey, and that's who got it. Let's see here. So one here from Ramona. She left a question as well as choosing the topic. After being chased from Riverrun, somehow around the same time, Rhaegar extracted Lyanna from around Harrenhal. Peter had the opportunity to cross roads with the happy couple. Do you think he's the one that launched the Rhaegar kidnapped Lyanna fake news and convinced Brandon of the truth of it? So this is a theory that has been around for a while, that in an effort to mess with everybody, Littlefinger intercepted a message and then passed it on to Brandon Stark, saying that, oh no, they didn't run away for love or running from Aerys or anything like that, that he made it a kidnapping in order to cause a war. As far as we know, at this time, Littlefinger was back in the Vale. So I don't think there's much of a chance of that happening. It was it would be a fun like retcon or like a look back in some way to that, like Littlefinger started his revenge very early on Brandon Stark. But I don't think you can assume, even from spreading that rumor, that it will definitely lead to a civil war, that like Brandon will ride into the Red Keep and say, come out and die, and all that other stuff. Like, that is way too much like foresight for that kind of thing. If there was for what happened with Brandon and Lyanna, I mean, Rhaegar and Lyanna and how it got to Brandon, it's probably just like a game of telephone where a misunderstanding got repeated to Brandon. He thought the worst of it. He was already very mad at Rhaegar for giving Lyanna the Queen of Love and Beauty at the Harrenhal tourney. So he probably was already against Rhaegar in his own way, unhappy about that whole thing, and then just took it the wrong way. Guilty Undertaker asks, is House Baelish a foil for Dunk, both lowbornish men who owe their rise to the Blackfire Rebellion? I think there's definitely a way you could read Littlefinger's ancestors and also Littlefinger's rise to power as a foil to Dunk. Very different ways of getting to power, but I think the major difference between them is that there's a genuineness to Dunk that isn't there to Littlefinger, but definitely the idea that they essentially rode the Blackfire rebellions and continue to this day in order to take advantage of chaos in a way that benefits them. Although Dunk doesn't really see it that way. He sort of does good deeds and then is accidentally rewarded for it, not really thinking it through. Like, that's a major part of the Hedge Knight, where at the end of it, he's like, oh, damn, I don't have money for my armor. I don't have, like, I'm not ready for this trial by 7, and the armor gives him the stuff free of charge, and everyone claps for him. And it's like, there's a quality of character to Dunk that is recognized that Littlefinger is trying to essentially mimic. Although he's much more like a Bloodraven figure in terms of how he reacts to things. But definitely both examples of how the Lowborn are rising to power in the vacuum of, lords and knights and soldiers who died during the Blackfire rebellions. Do you think, only Shadowkin says, do you think it will be Sansa who ends up ruling Winterfell, and will Cat Lady Stoneheart end up bringing across Peter Baelish with her daughter? Good question. I haven't seen much speculation about if Littlefinger will end up meeting Lady Stoneheart again. The foreshadowing seems to be that Littlefinger will probably die at Winterfell or in the north. I don't know if Lady Stoneheart will make her way up there, but I would definitely like to see. That would be a really cool scene if the two of them cross paths at some point. And will Sansa be the one that ends up ruling Winterfell? It could be. I don't think Bran's going to. Maybe Rickon. I don't know if he's going to die or not. I don't think Jon will do it. I don't think Jon will end up ruling Winterfell. So if it's not Rickon, it probably will be Sansa. Could Littlefinger have... Oh no, we already answered this. Yeah, Robb Stark is not Brandon Stark's child. Robb was really, Brandon Stark was long dead when Robb was conceived. You can't fake that. Robert from Indie Geek places Littlefinger at the end of Crossroads at this point, relating the kidnap story to Brandon. Yeah, I tend not to agree. I tend not to agree with that one. Radio Westeros did a whole episode on this that you guys should listen to, and it doesn't seem like Littlefinger was really anywhere near there. I don't know. It's. I would be surprised if Littlefinger had his finger in that one. Do you think Littlefinger, Flint and Steel, do you think Littlefinger will be handsy with Sansa, will end up being his downfall? Perhaps someone sees. I think the thing that's going to be his downfall is that Sansa is going to realize Littlefinger's role in the downfall of House Stark. That letter that Lysa wrote is still out there as knowledge. It seems like Littlefinger is sort of trading on the idea that Sansa is unaware and that she's a novice at being like a schemer and putting things together, but she's rapidly growing in her mental abilities to think strategically and think like Littlefinger. And as she does, and thinking about Lysa Tully's murder and what she said, she'll probably put together the pieces that, wait a second, what if this guy was behind it? That kind of thing. I think that will probably be the downfall, although him being handsy could be a thing that sort of breaks the spell that he has on her. What about... Is Radio Westeros streaming today? I can't find a link. I don't think they are. I think they're off this week. Let's see here. Oh, I got a Patreon question from Erin M. She wants to know if there's any good left at all in Littlefinger. She says, I don't know why, but I don't hate Littlefinger as much as other people. I know he's horrible and does horrible things, but for some reason, all the villains in the story, I pity him more than I hate him. And I think that is something that the books does a lot better than the show, where Littlefinger does have things you can have empathy for him for. What happened with him and Brandon, and the way he got kind of dumped back in the Vale, the way all the Tullys turned on him in his moment of greatest need, when he thought they were his friends, they would have his back against the stranger Brandon Stark, and they all turned against him. There's definitely, I think, empathy you can have for him, but he is a terribly horrible person. The things he does to people in the story, what he's doing to Sansa now, the way he's trying to enact a revenge on the Starks and the Tullys, the way that he started this War of the Five Kings in effect to try and essentially get them all killed, is so far removed and in such an overreaction to what happened to him that I don't think there's any good left in Littlefinger at this point, that he has been essentially consumed by his hate and his rage and his desire for revenge, and to essentially not feel powerless again. That he wants to kind of erase this feeling from himself by erasing all the people involved. There's maybe a point where Littlefinger could have been salvaged as a person, but I'm guessing that much in the same way that Tyrion's voyage to Essos essentially cemented this idea in himself of self-loathing and hatred and the feelings of revenge, Littlefinger probably experienced much the same thing on his way back from Riverrun to the Vale, and then staying there on the Drearfort, as he calls it, for quite some time before ending up deciding to not give up on himself. Yeah, it's probably all like Hoster Tully's fault. I'm gonna blame Hoster Tully. Everything Hoster Tully's fault. Littlefinger, get a job. I wonder if Barrel Rider, I wonder if Littlefinger will steal Edmure again. That would be interesting if they cross paths again. But it seems like Littlefinger has essentially said, like, screw you to all members of House Tully. I mean, he literally murdered Lysa, got Catelyn killed indirectly through the Red Wedding by drawing him into the war. And also, he doesn't seem that broken up about Catelyn dying. I don't think we have anything on him where he's like, where Sansa walks in on him like mourning her mother or anything like that. I don't think Littlefinger and Edmure have probably talked since then. But it would be interesting to see what would happen. I imagine it would be, at the very least, an icy reception that Littlefinger will not have forgotten that Edmure abandoned him for the stranger Brandon Stark in his time of greatest need. He thought they were friends, and it turns out that Edmure's loyalty to Hoster and the Tullys was greater than their friendship, and he seems to have internalized that and taken it very personally. Maud Mary 1 says, does Littlefinger have any connections to the Iron Bank? It's hard to say, because like I talked about earlier, he seems to have done sort of a erasure of his Braavosi heritage. There is some amount of him that is maybe connected to Braavos in a weird way, like perhaps the Faceless Men, like in a Game of Thrones, when they're talking about how to kill Daenerys, it's Littlefinger who knows the prices, essentially, on how much it costs to hire the Faceless Men, implying that maybe he's tried to hire them in the past. He definitely has his trade and his businesses, so he may have some kind of connections in that way with the Iron Bank. I believe it's also Littlefinger who ran up the Iron Bank's debts, that he's the one that that took out all the money, and then I think Tywin Lannister bought the debt or something like that. I'm not really sure, but I don't think he's like working with the Iron Bank. I think they're just like a convenient financial tool in order to advance himself and to use them as a weapon against Robert and Tywin. He's certainly dealt with them. I don't think like he's like a secret agent of the Iron Bank. I don't think he has like a pact with the Sea Lord of Braavos. I don't think he's like exploiting his Braavosi heritage in any way. It seems like he deals with them in the way that a Master of Coin has to. Hoster Tully is this terrible? I hope Brendan Blackfish does more than just be murdered off screen in the books. Yeah, Hoster Tully was terrible. His treatment of Lysa, his treatment of Littlefinger is pretty despicable, and I think the Blackfish's essentially saying, I'm never going to talk to this guy again, tells you kind of all you need to know about Hoster Tully as a person, even though we don't really learn about him much on the page. The Blackfish seems like a pretty stand-up, moral person, good head on his shoulders, and he thinks Hoster's a piece of shit, so. Oh, Stanko says, oh my fucking god, I am live watching Joe Magician. Hi, how's it going? Glad you could catch it, although we're going to end in a few minutes, so a little bit late. Guilty Undertaker says, why would Littlefinger mourn Cat when he has a new improved Cat, aka Sansa? That's a good point, and I think it's something I read in analysis is talking about Littlefinger and his relationship to Cat, and that he's not actually in love with Catelyn Tully, or Catelyn Stark as she exists as a person, because they haven't talked to each other in like 15 years. He's in love with the idea of her, much in the same way I was talking about last week with the relationship between Cersei and Rhaegar, where it's, to Littlefinger, Catelyn's sort of a life not had, not so much a person, but a thing to him, a thing to be chased, something to be acquired, another asset. And that sort of seems to be how he treats their relationship, which is terrible. And that's probably why he doesn't really mourn her in any real way, because to him, his pursuit of her and trying to attain the level where he could have married her at the time instead of Brandon Stark seems to be much more something about himself than anything really about Catelyn. It's almost like she's become a goal, or like what is it, like a level of success he wants to get himself to, rather than the real person. Like even if Catelyn, let's say there's an alternate reality where in a Game of Thrones, Catelyn throws herself at Littlefinger and he gets the relationship that he never got from her, and he cuckolds Ned and all this other kind of stuff. I don't think that changes anything for Littlefinger at the current time, because that's not really what he wants. He wants his past to go away. He wants that hurt to end, and sleeping with Catelyn Tully won't do that. Yeah, she was a trophy. She's not a real person to Littlefinger anymore. Yeah, manic pixie dream girl kind of thing. Woman on a pedestal, not a real person. She's just a thing that he wants. To him, Catelyn's like Harrenhal, or being Lord Paramount. It's like the same relationship between him and Lysa, where they finally get married. He becomes Lord Protector of the Vale. He has everything he wants, and then he kills her. So it kind of shows that it's not about the person anymore. It's about the power and objectification. Let's take a few more questions, and then we'll get out of here. Milo Gentry's trying to get us to 180 likes. Okay, if we get to 180 likes, I'll answer the last question as Gurm. How about that? We're at 173 right now, 223 people watching, it looks like. Yeah, so last call for questions. Just shout them out there. We're going to try and do this fast. Let's see here. Oh, good quote. Evil things begin when you treat people as things, from Terry Pratchett. Yeah, that's a good one. Did I read Gurm's new post, Flinted Steel? Yes, I did. We talked about it at the top of the stream. during the first few minutes, so can go back and see that one. What will happen to if Harry the Heir does not die and the marriage happens? I have an impression that everyone thinks he is deadsies. What will happen if Harry the Heir does not die? Well, he's right now supposed to marry Sansa. That's a good question. I definitely think Harry will die, but how would their relationship go? How would their marriage go? Well, it's not like Sansa's going to be in a position where she could be a distance ruler of the North. Like, that place has real problems, and it's been destroyed by war, and it will be destroyed by the others, and the Boltons and the Civil War and all that kind of stuff. So even if they do get married, it will probably be the kind of thing where she has to spend most of her time in the North, and she can't really ignore it. I do think, though, that Harry's minutes are numbered. Oh, looks like we just got to it. Oh, wow, that was tight. All right, so we just hit 180. Here we go. Last question. I can never get this thing straight when I put it on. All right, there we go. Garm hat. $5 from Eugene. Thank you so much. Very generous for the hat switch. There you go. Got the hat switch. All right, so last question here. Let's see here. Only Shadowkin. Do you think that Littlefinger did love Cat, and maybe some measure of that passed to Sansa? If that's the case, maybe that is his downfall, maybe not unlike the show. So there is some part of Littlefinger that loved Catelyn as the person, but it was Catelyn as the girl that she was. It was like, it's a love of the old times, a love of childhood. It's not a love as a real person. I suspect that Littlefinger's relationship to Sansa, and the one he seems to be trying to encourage, is not one of love, and it's not one of any genuine caring he has for Sansa. I think for him that he sees her as a way to try again with Catelyn. This idea of Catelyn he has in his head to kind of rewrite his history, that kind of thing. Whatever love he has for her, the person, I think, died long ago. But I think it is true that his soft spot for Sansa and Cat will probably, yes, contribute to his downfall. That there's sort of this idea where Littlefinger is, since we're talking about his Braavosi great-grandfather, that he's sort of like a water dancer at court, that he dances in between the different lords, and he's able to sow chaos, and he's able to advance himself, because there's sort of this idea to him that nothing really matters, that he's willing to kill a king just because it will make things more chaotic, and he can take advantage of that. There's this idea that he's not tied down to anyone or anything. There's a line where he says, like, how many men in King's Landing have a mockingbird sewn over their heart, and that kind of thing, where his power is based in this ability to stay loose and agile and dodge everything because no one knows where to hit him. But Sansa is a place where he is anchoring himself. He is exposing himself to his enemies, and he's exposing himself to danger, because now there's finally something Littlefinger cares about that is guiding his actions, which makes him more predictable than he was before. Especially if someone finds out that Sansa Stark is actually Elaine Stone, like we know that the House Royce seems to already know. So yeah, that could definitely be a part of his downfall, that his affection for Sansa is a weak spot, one that he is making known to the rest of the world, a thing he previously did not do. And I'm hoping Sansa that will deliver that downfall, that she realizes what he's doing and tries to get revenge for House Stark on Littlefinger. Whew. All right, so went a little bit over. So again, thank you guys so much for everybody that stopped by today. No stream to send you to afterwards. I don't think Radio Westeros is going today. I think they'll be going next week. I believe they said they're going to take a break. Tune in. Let's see here. This coming Tuesday for more Crusader Kings 2 action, where I'm playing as House Stark. There will be a Stark Civil War coming. Maybe. I hope not. I don't want to, but it may. And of course, next Saturday for another Quaranstream. Haven't picked the topic yet, but you know, I'll think of something just like this. Thank you again so much to Ramona for the suggestion and to look at this. The idea of House Baelish and their history, and the tinfoil about him maybe being secret Valyrian or Targaryen. What I'm working on next, I think the next thing that'll come out will be the Meat House Man patron only episode. After that, I'm going to be looking at doing the Tattered Prince, what is his 5-year gap identity, kind of like Brienne the Beauty and Pretty Maris, along with, I'm going to put out another video talking about like what the 5-year gap is, just to be like, so I don't have to keep saying it every time I put out one of these videos. But yeah, thanks so much. Again, thank you to all my patrons and to everyone that left a super chat today, all the likes, all the views. Like, subscribe, do all the things. Have a good Saturday. I'll see you all later.